Imagine the night before dawn in Agra, sometime in the middle of the 17th century. The air outside the palace walls is the colour of watered milk, touched with wood smoke and sandal. Somewhere a night watchman strikes bronze with a stick, and the sound rolls through narrow streets like a yawn the city forgot to finish. You are not a noble, not a soldier. You are a maker of scents, a attarwala, one of the quiet chemists of the Mughal world. Your hands know the weight of rose petals better than coins. You measure life in drops, not in years. And yes, before sunrise you are already awake, because in this city the best perfumes are born before light touches them. You sit in your workshop, a low-roofed room lined with copper stills that gleam faintly in the lamplight. Each vessel has a thin neck curved like a heron's beak. They will carry fragrance from crushed flowers to condensation bowls cooled with water, drawn at midnight. The process is half craft, half devotion, and fully exhausting. A thin trail of steam drifts up, smelling faintly of wet earth and jasmine. You close your eyes and listen. Distillation, like prayer, requires attention and silence. Outside, a stray dog coughs. Inside, the liquid in the pot whispers like it's telling you gossip about rain. This is how the day begins for the perfumers of Hindustan, with patience, heat, and a long conversation between matter and air. The Mughals, especially under Jahangir and Shah Jahan, adored scent almost as much as symmetry. Historians tell us that royal records included not just inventories of jewels, but lists of perfumes: rose, vetiver, saffron, aloes wood, ambergris, and one particularly indulgent mixture that allegedly used more musk than mathematics. Court chroniclers described emperors entering assemblies wrapped in veils of fragrance so dense that courtiers recognized them by smell before sight. Still, the perfume maker's world was small. Your workshop stands behind a market near the Yamuna, away from the marble and fountains. The air is sticky with sugar, oil, and gossip. Merchants haggle over indigo and salt. Somewhere, a parrot shouts an obscenity it must have learned from a spice trader. The empire, for all its grandeur, smells like cumin and sweat long before it smells like roses. You pour another ladle of petals into the still. There are thousands, each one hand-plucked before sunrise from fields outside Kanauj. By evening, they'll have yielded a single bottle of itter-e-gulab, rose essence. The math is terrible, the profit uncertain, and yet the act feels necessary. Because the truth is, in this empire, perfume is not decoration, it is language. To smell of certain things is to declare allegiance, class, even mood. The emperor might wear ambergris to council, but a poet prefers sandalwood when composing verses no one will pay him for. Fragrance, in a sense, is philosophy turned liquid, a belief that invisible things shape the visible world. That's where the irony begins. You, the perfume maker, slowly become a thinker. Not because you read. Books are expensive and parchment smells terrible. But because your craft keeps asking questions. How does one capture what cannot be held? Why does the essence of a flower outlast the flower itself? And why does the act of distillation feel in your chest like distilling thought? At some point, without meaning to, you start comparing souls to scents, both invisible, both volatile, both judged by their lingering traces. That's when you realize you've drifted into metaphysics by accident. Here's your historical fact. The Mughal court indeed maintained official perfumers, many from the old artisan families of Kanauj. They held respected posts, were paid in silver, and sometimes worked directly under the Hakim, the royal physician, since perfumes doubled as medicine. Documents record that Shah Jahan's perfumer received yearly stipends rivaling minor poets. Scent, for the empire, was health, status, and theology blended. You would never admit it aloud, but the job changes you. Distilling a tar teaches you patience, yes, but also detachment. You watch substance become vapor, and vapor become memory. Every drop you make disappears into someone else's skin, someone else's story. You begin to suspect this is what all creation feels like for the gods, repetition without ownership. As the sun climbs, the city wakes. Copper pans clang, hawkers shout about mangoes, pigeons discuss politics on rooftops. You step outside to stretch. The lane smells of rain, though the sky is clear. Maybe your neighbors are cooking lentils. Maybe the weather's teasing. Maybe your workshop just leaks philosophy. A boy runs by carrying a small jar of attar, sealed with wax. You know that jar. You filled it yesterday. It's headed to the fort, to someone who won't remember the hands that made it. That's fine. You're learning to enjoy anonymity. You wander through the bazaar, the noise, a mixture of bargaining and prayer. Someone's selling sugar sculptures shaped like parrots. Someone else insists their sandalwood paste cures heartbreak. You pass a group of scholars under a neem tree, arguing whether fragrance has ruh, spirit. One says yes, because the Quran mentions musk in paradise. Another says no, because spirit cannot evaporate. You listen quietly, knowing the truth lies somewhere between the still and the sky. An obscure cultural tidbit among Mughal elites, exchanging bottles of perfume was a coded social ritual. The blend chosen revealed subtle messages: rose for loyalty, amber for affection, jasmine for flirtation, vetiver for apology. Courtiers who understood these signals could read a palace better than any spy. Some even composed short verses to accompany the scent, like scented tweets centuries before Twitter. By midday, the air in your lane grows heavy with heat. You retreat indoors. The still bubbles softly. The scent thickens until it's hard to think about anything else. You begin writing small notes on scraps of paper. Observations, equations of aroma. If rose eat beauty and smoke eat memory, then what is incense? Later, a Sufi friend visits. He wears a turban that smells faintly of burnt sugar and myrrh. He sits cross-legged by the doorway, watching steam rise from your still. You know, he says, the Prophet once compared good scent to prayer. It lifts, even when no one sees it. You nod, pretending you haven't already written that exact thought in your notebook. He looks at you again. You'll end up a philosopher if you're not careful. You smile. Too late. Historians still debate whether artisans like you genuinely crossed into philosophical circles or whether the overlap is modern romanticism. Records are thin, perfumes don't leave footnotes, but the writings of certain 17th century scholars, people like Abd al-Hakim Sialkoti and Dara Shikoh, often mention scent as metaphor for divine unity. Someone must have whispered those ideas from a workshop like yours. Afternoon fades. The sunlight slants through lattice windows, cutting gold bars across your tools. The air smells of hot metal and exhausted roses. You feel the weight of the day settle behind your eyes. In this tired hour, even philosophy grows quiet. You pour the last batch into glass flasks, cork them with cotton, and set them in a wooden chest. Tomorrow, they'll be sold, worn, diluted, forgotten. But tonight, for a few hours, the scent is yours alone. You step outside again. The sky has turned to the color of old copper, and the Yamuna glows faintly in the distance. Children chase each other through puddles. Someone's flute stumbles over a love song. The smell of fried dough and ghee wraps around you like a kind argument. You realize that everything in this city, from its monuments to its markets, wants to be fragrant. Even decay smells sweet if you wait long enough. A tiny joke crosses your mind. Perhaps enlightenment is just better distillation equipment. You smile to yourself because it might be true. Night settles, soft and smoky. You light a small clay lamp, set it by your window, and open a jar of your newest blend: rose, sandal, and a trace of oud. The fragrance unfurls slowly, steady and deep. The lamp flickers, the scent rises, and for a moment you think, maybe heaven isn't above. Maybe it's just the right mixture of patience, fire, and faith in what you can't see. Outside, the city drifts towards sleep. You hear laughter fade into lullaby, carts creak one last time, the watchman's bell echo across rooftops. You lean against the window and breathe. In that breath lies the entire Mughal philosophy of scent: to find permanence in what passes, to name the invisible, to love what evaporates but leaves warmth behind. You smile, too tired for revelation, too peaceful to need one. The lamp burns lower. The scent lingers. The world exhales. Now let yourself do the same. Close your eyes. The next section will wait for you. The next morning arrives like steam rising from a copper pot. You wake before the first call to prayer, your skin still holding the ghost of yesterday's fragrance. It clings to your wrist, faint and familiar. Rose, sandalwood, and something you can't quite name. It smells like memory pretending to be science. You sit by the window and watch the light gather. The city is still half asleep. A few early traders move through the lanes, their sandals brushing dust into soft clouds. Someone coughs, someone sings a line from a poem they don't remember finishing. You smile. Agra always wakes reluctantly. Inside your small workshop, the air feels patient. The stills rest in silence, their metal bodies cool and dull. You light a small lamp, just enough to tease colour from copper. The shadows stretch, then curl into corners like lazy cats. You pour a little rose water into your palms and wash your face. It's not vanity. It's habit. A way to begin the day with scent instead of noise. The Mughal court calls it nazakat, refinement, delicacy. But for you, it's just comfort. Perfume is your morning prayer. You prepare today's batch with slow, practiced hands. Copper lid, cotton seal, a trickle of water on top to cool the condensing pipe. You listen to the hiss as fire licks the pot from below. It sounds like the start of an argument between elements: earth, water, heat, and air, all trying to become something new. You think of what your Sufi friend said yesterday. That perfume is prayer, that vapor is soul. You didn't answer him then, but you've been arguing silently ever since. If vapor is soul, you think, then every scent is a sermon. If fire releases spirit from matter, then philosophy is simply the art of burning carefully. By mid-morning, the workshop fills with the slow pulse of fragrance. You open the window to let the air circulate. Outside, sunlight climbs the walls like a gentle conspiracy. Children run by carrying sweetbread. The smell of sugar and yeast wanders in. A woman selling flowers stops at your door. Her basket is full of tuberose and jasmine, heavy with dew. You buy a handful. The stems leak coolness onto your skin. She smiles without looking up, already calculating the next sale. You think even commerce smells like faith here. You arrange the petals inside the still. They dissolve slowly, sighing into the water. You watch them lose their color, surrendering beauty for essence. It feels like watching mortality in real time, the art of becoming invisible gracefully. That's the secret your craft keeps teaching you. Everything worthwhile eventually evaporates. The trick is to leave behind something that lingers. Here's your historical fact for this part of the story. During the height of Mughal rule, the empire's perfumers were organized in guilds. Kaneuj, the ancient perfume capital, had families who traced their recipes back 1,000 years. Each guarded its own ratios of rose, vetiver, and sandal, recorded not in ink, but in memory. Apprentices learned by scent, not measurement, a training system where your nose was your textbook. The emperor's personal attar maker often doubled as a court alchemist, since both crafts dealt with transformation. To turn flowers into vapor was chemistry. To turn desire into calm was philosophy. The two became one profession. You rest your head against the wall and close your eyes. The air is heavy but not oppressive. You can hear the faint drip of condensation, the perfume cooling drop by drop. It sounds almost like a heartbeat. You remember the first time you smelled true attar, real rose essence, distilled properly. You were a child then. The scent was overwhelming. You sneezed. The elder laughed and said, "That means your soul noticed." You didn't understand then. You do now. Around noon, your apprentice arrives, a thin boy named Ajar, all elbows and curiosity. He bows, awkwardly, nearly spilling the bucket of water he carries. "Master," he says, "why do we work with flowers that die in one day?" You pause. It's not a bad question. "Because," you say, "the dead ones don't argue." He frowns, unsure if you're joking. You smile. "Because the best beauty knows when to leave." He seems to understand a little. He adds wood to the fire. The flames dance like excited scribes. As you work together, he keeps asking questions. Why do rose petals yield more scent at dawn? Why do copper vessels sound different after each distillation? Why does musk smell like thought? You answer what you can. When you can't, you invent. That's part of the job too, filling the spaces between facts with wonder. An obscure cultural tidbit. Some Mughal physicians believed scent could balance the humours of the body. A little rose to calm the heart, a little vetiver to cool the blood. Too much amber, though, might inspire excessive romance. A medical condition no one complained about publicly. You imagine emperors diagnosing themselves with poetry and wonder how anyone got any ruling done. By late afternoon, the still is almost silent. The last drops slide down the cooling tube, falling with a sound like small truths. You gather the finished attar in a crystal vial and hold it up to the light. It glows faintly gold, trembling like it might evaporate from nervousness. You smile. It's perfect. You should feel triumphant. Instead, you feel thoughtful. You dip a reed stick into the vial and place one drop behind your ear. The scent opens slowly, unfolding like memory. You whisper, "There you are." Later, after evening prayers, you walk to the edge of the river. The Yamuna gleams under a low moon. People are still awake. Fishermen, lovers, wanderers who can't sleep. You find a quiet spot near the ghats and sit down. The breeze carries a mixture of smoke, clay, and night-blooming jasmine. It feels like every scent in the city has gathered here for reflection. You take out your notebook. The pages are blotched with oil stains and thumbprints. You write slowly. The soul distills itself daily. Heat reveals what silence hides. Even absence leaves residue. Then you close the book and laugh softly, because philosophers always write like that when they think no one's watching. Here's where things shift. A few weeks later, a royal messenger appears at your door. He carries a small scroll sealed in wax and tied with thread. It smells faintly of ambergris, a luxury only courtiers can afford. You break the seal. The letter is short. His Majesty requests a new fragrance. Something to honor thought itself, something no one has yet imagined. You blink. You reread it twice, then you laugh, quietly, incredulously. They want you to bottle philosophy. You spend days thinking, what does thought smell like? Paper and dust? Ink and fatigue? Or maybe nothing at all. Pure clarity, scentless truth. But a bottle of nothing won't impress an emperor, so you begin to experiment. You mix sandalwood for calm, clove for curiosity, vetiver for grounding, and the smallest drop of musk for memory, because even clarity needs warmth. The blend smells strange, like an argument between temple and forest. You name it fikr, which means reflection. Historians still debate whether such a fragrance ever existed. Records mention a royal scent commissioned by Shah Jahan for his study, but no recipe survives. Some say it was destroyed in the wars that followed. Others claim the formula lives hidden in Kanauj, passed from perfumer to perfumer as whispered myth. Perhaps that's why scholars today smell sandalwood and feel wiser for no reason. You present the perfume to the court weeks later. The hall gleams with marble and mirrors. Courtiers bow. The emperor sits under a canopy of peacock feathers, eyes bright with curiosity. You kneel, open the vial, and let the air carry its invisible thread. The room changes. Conversations fade. Even the candles seem to pause. The emperor breathes in once, then he says quietly, "This is how silence should smell." You bow deeply, unsure whether to take that as praise or prophecy. He grants you a gold coin and waves his hand. The court resumes its noise. You walk out, relieved and slightly amused. You think, well, I guess thought smells expensive after all. That night, back in your workshop, you light the lamp and sit by thee still. The fire hums softly. The air smells faintly of what's just been made. Not rose, not wood, not musk, but something in between. You close your eyes and think of how everything you've touched today will vanish into air by tomorrow, and yet somehow that feels right. Because what else is philosophy but the art of letting things rise? The lamp flickers, the city hums, the air carries your day away, drop by drop, into the sleeping empire. You breathe in, then out. Slowly. Season changes quietly. The way perfume changes in a closed bottle. Slowly, invisibly, until one morning the air smells different, and you can't remember when it began. The rains have left, and the sun over Agra now burns like molten brass on rooftops. The city seems to simmer in its own reflection. You keep the shutters half closed in your workshop, not out of mystery, but mercy. The copper stills hold heat like small suns, and working by them during the day feels like debating with a god who refuses to whisper. Still you continue because work is routine and routine is safety. The scent you prepare this month is new, part experiment, part rebellion. You are trying to trap not just smell but mood, that calm, slow hour after rain when the streets gleam and the air feels forgiving. You've begun calling it itra-e-sukun, the essence of rest. You know no one will buy it. Still you make it anyway. There's something strange about distilling calm while your own life grows complicated. Since presenting your fragrance fikr at the court, your name has begun circulating among nobles and scholars, often followed by the cautious phrase, the philosopher perfumer. You pretend not to care, but the label clings tighter than any scent you've made. A few evenings ago, a visiting scholar from Delhi stopped by unannounced, smelling faintly of parchment and betel leaf. He spoke politely, as if tasting each word, and asked whether you believed fragrance could reveal truth. You said fragrance could only reveal attention. He nodded as if that was either profound or disappointing. You couldn't tell which, and then left a silver coin on your table as payment for your thought. You kept it, not for the money but for the absurdity. Since when do philosophers charge by the word and perfumers by the breath? By late afternoon the air turns liquid with heat. The river slows, sluggish, heavy with silt. You can hear it sigh when oars cut through. The market thins out. Even gossip takes shelter. You sit inside, working slowly, dipping cloth strips into fragrant water and hanging them by the window to dry. When wind passes through, the entire lane smells faintly of meditation. It's not a bad reputation to have. People pause outside your shop more often now, peeking in not to buy but to breathe. A few leave copper coins, others simply nod in quiet gratitude. You suspect your perfumes have turned into a kind of unlicensed therapy. That's fine. The empire could use more peace and fewer decrees. Here's your historical fact for this stretch of time. During the late Mughal era, scent became part of politics. The exchange of perfumes between nobles often marked alliances, forgiveness, or subtle rivalry. The imperial palace in Delhi maintained a Khushbu khana, literally a fragrance room, where perfumes were tested, stored, and discussed with the same seriousness given to treaties. Historical accounts even note that Emperor Aurangzeb, otherwise known for austerity, allowed his courtiers to wear only neutral scents during official discussions, no musk, no rose, because strong aromas, he claimed, inflame the heart and confuse reason. It's both endearing and slightly hilarious that one of the world's largest empires depended on olfactory moderation to maintain logic. In your quieter hours, you start thinking about this invisible diplomacy of smell. Perhaps that's why philosophy and perfumery belong together. Both operate on subtleties, small changes, faint traces, the space between things. You begin to see a pattern. The empire's love of scent mirrors its struggle with impermanence. Palaces crumble, dynasties fade, but fragrance, even if temporary, leaves memory behind. You write this in your notebook late at night. Perhaps God distills souls to remember what they once were. You're not sure if it's heresy or poetry, maybe both. You decide not to ask. One evening, your apprentice Azhar bursts in, breathless, waving a letter that smells faintly of sandal. It's from a court poet named Faizullah Beg, who has heard of you and wishes to collaborate on something inspired by the unity of art and scent. You laugh quietly at the phrasing. It sounds like a polite way of saying he wants free perfume in exchange for verses. Still, curiosity wins. You agree to meet him by the gardens of Sikandra, near Akbar's tomb. When you arrive the next day, the gardens are nearly empty except for a few goats nibbling on marigolds. Faizullah is easy to recognize, a man in silks too fine for the dust he's walking through, holding a notebook as though afraid it might float away. He greets you warmly, though his eyes look more practiced than sincere. You sit under a neem tree, and he begins talking about how scent and poetry are both breaths of the divine made mortal. You nod along, mostly to keep him happy. Then he says something that catches you. The nose is wiser than the tongue. It knows beauty long before the mind names it. You look at him, surprised, because that line feels true enough to belong to silence. You ask if he wrote it. He smiles. Not yet, he says. That afternoon, you begin a quiet collaboration. You create scents. He writes poems. Together you test the limits of language and fragrance, how far each can carry emotion before collapsing into abstraction. He names one blend zikr, remembrance. Another, fana, dissolution. Both smell like the edge between presence and loss. The partnership becomes a small legend in your quarter. Some evenings, locals gather by your shop window to listen as he recites while you pour. The combination of poetry and steam turns the narrow lane into something like a shrine, an obscure cultural tidbit. In Mughal India, poets often described scent as a bridge between the seen and unseen worlds. There's even a forgotten genre of verse called Khushbu ghazals, perfume poems. where every stanza revolved around a fragrance and its emotional twin. A poem might begin with rose and end with longing, or start with sandalwood and fade into wisdom. Most of those verses were never written down. They were recited once, in gatherings scented with incense, and then left to evaporate like the perfumes themselves. Perhaps that's why they worked. Impermanence is the oldest muse. Weeks pass in this fragrant rhythm. You notice how your apprentice listens differently now, less to your words, more to the pauses between them. You catch him once, staring at the rising steam like it's a lesson. Maybe it is. You think of what your Sufi friend once said, that work becomes worship when repetition turns to reverence. You didn't understand then, you might now, but not everyone enjoys your growing fame. A rival perfumer across the market, known for his sharp tongue and sharper elbows, begins whispering that your methods are impure, too experimental, too mystical. One morning you find a note nailed to your door. Attar is for the body, not the soul. You tear it down without comment, but it leaves a faint bitterness in your chest. You light extra incense that day, not to mask the smell, but to reclaim the air. By autumn, the days shorten. The city wears a cooler scent: smoke, tamarind, damp stone. You feel slower too, less concerned with reputation, more with quiet. You begin keeping fewer vials, selling only enough to live. You tell Ajar he'll soon take over the trade. He protests, but you smile. You know the rhythm of life by now. Every perfume has its evaporation point. Historians still debate whether figures like you ever truly existed, or whether you are composite myths, craftsmen imagined by later writers to personify the era's obsession with blending art and faith. Some say the story of the philosopher perfumer was born from Sufi allegory, where distillation symbolized purification of the self. Others insist records of perfumers in court payrolls hint at a real lineage of thinkers whose philosophy was literally in the air. The truth, as always, likely lingers somewhere between fragrance and fact. One night, while pouring a last batch, you think about legacy. Not the kind written in books, but the kind that hides in memory, like the ghost of sandalwood on an old shawl. Maybe that's all you've ever been making. Not perfumes, but reminders that existence itself smells sweetest when it fades. You laugh softly at the thought and whisper to the empty room. So, in the end, even philosophers just want to smell good before disappearing. The lamp burns low. The air trembles faintly with the scent of cooling copper and old roses. Outside, the wind carries the sound of prayer from a distant mosque, blending it with the low hum of crickets. You listen, eyes half closed, thinking that maybe this is what thought truly smells like. Quiet persistence, humble warmth, and the faint sweetness of something trying to become invisible. You breathe in, steady and slow, until the edges of the world blur. The scent holds, then releases the way all truths do. The morning begins like all others, quietly uncertain, with a slow drift of smoke from a nearby cooking fire and the faint murmur of water carriers moving through the lane. You wake before the city does. The sky is still pale, a washed-out grey, as if the dawn has been diluted with too much memory. The air tastes of ash and rosewater. It smells of work waiting to be done. You sit up, rub your eyes, and for a long moment just listen. To footsteps, to silence, to the echo of yesterday's thoughts that still cling to the walls like faint perfume. The workshop feels different today. The copper stills stand cold, the coals asleep. You light a lamp, trim the wick, and the first flame of the day shivers into life. Its light plays across your tools. Glass vials, a wooden box of dried petals, a notebook streaked with oil. You think of all the mornings spent here, distilling the invisible. You wonder whether the air remembers each fragrance you've made. If the walls carry the ghosts of scent, the way a temple carries prayer. As you begin preparing your mixture, Ajar enters, half awake, his hair still wet from the well. He greets you softly and sets down a bundle of vetiver roots, their thin green strands smelling of cool earth. You nod, and he starts sorting them in silence. There's comfort in that, the wordless rhythm between master and apprentice, the trust built through repetition. He hums under his breath, a tune that has no name. You realize he has learned your patience, maybe even your quiet. Today you plan to make something simple. The court has demanded more of the fragrance you call fikr, and though part of you resents the repetition, another part finds peace in it. Philosophy, after all, thrives on rephrasing. You crush sandalwood, measure the drops of rosewater, and grind clove to dust. The scent builds slowly, layering calm upon curiosity, until the air thickens with contemplation. Outside, a neighbor calls to his wife about the price of lentils. Somewhere, a parrot shouts the same obscenity you've heard all week. The world is unbothered by your thoughts, and that's what keeps them honest. You smile and return to the still, watching steam coil upward like calligraphy written in air. You think of the Mughal architects, the way they built gardens with the same logic you build perfumes: symmetry, proportion, flow. Each scent is its own courtyard, designed for wandering. You've always admired that about the empire, how it turned order into art. Even the mosques and mausoleums seem perfumed in their precision. There's a serenity in geometry, a stillness that feels like truth. Perhaps scent follows the same rule. It's not the ingredients that matter, but the balance between them. Here's your historical fact for this moment. Mughal gardens were often designed around scent as much as sight. Flower beds were arranged by fragrance intensity, so as visitors walked through, the air unfolded like a musical composition. Soft narcissus near the entrance, heady jasmine near the fountains, cooling vetiver by the water channels. Court chroniclers wrote that the emperor's evening strolls were guided by aroma rather than sight. Even the architecture of leisure had its own olfactory geometry. You picture those gardens now, perfectly trimmed, their paths echoing with sandalwood dust and moonlight. You imagine yourself there, walking slowly behind Shah Jahan, the scent of marble dust and roses mingling as history turns to vapor. You laugh quietly at the absurdity of it, a perfumer daydreaming of palaces he'll never see. Yet somehow the thought comforts you. Everyone dreams in proportion to their patience. The hours stretch. The day folds into its warm middle. Heat gathers against the roof. The air thickens until sound itself feels heavy. You sit by the open window, letting the wind cool your hands. The Yamuna glimmers faintly in the distance, wide and slow, carrying the reflections of domes and clouds. You watch the river and think about movement, the way everything flows, even when it seems still. You open your notebook and write, "Scent is geometry undone. It moves, yet stays whole. It disappears, yet leaves design behind." You close the book and smile. Philosophy feels lighter when it smells good. In the afternoon, Faizullah Beg arrives, the poet, his clothes dusted with the journey's fatigue. He collapses on a stool and groans about Delhi's latest fashion in verse, long metaphors, short memories. You offer him a vial of fikr, and he inhales deeply, eyes closing. "Still smells like thought," he says, "maybe clearer this time." You tell him repetition purifies. He laughs and scribbles something in his notebook, murmuring a couplet about roses that think too much. You promise to pretend it's flattering. He tells you a rumor. A philosopher from Lahore has written an essay linking scent to time, claiming each perfume decays according to its moral virtue. Amber lasts because it's noble, Rose fades because it's proud. You snort. People will philosophize about anything that doesn't argue back, you say. He grins. That's why they love ideas and dislike women. You both laugh, quietly but sincerely. The air between you smells of mirth and irony, an obscure cultural tidbit. Among the Mughal elite, fragrance was believed to shape temperament. Aristocrats stored garments in sandalwood chests not just to preserve them, but to imbue calmness into their character. Scholars sometimes perfumed their ink, believing scented writing would produce gentler thoughts. There are even records of libraries treated with rose smoke before recitations, to soften the air of study. Imagine that, knowledge as a matter of scent control. The sun slides lower. The city begins to exhale. You and Faizullah sit in comfortable silence, listening to the world cool. He asks if you've ever thought about bottling the smell of evening itself. You say you've tried, but dusk refuses to cooperate. It keeps changing shape just when you think you've caught it. He smiles and says, "Then you've understood love." You roll your eyes. And philosophy? "The same thing, only slower," he replies. When he leaves, the workshop feels a little emptier, but not lonely. The quiet settles gently like a well-balanced perfume. You finish cleaning your tools, wipe down the copper stills, and sit by the doorway watching twilight gather. Children chase fireflies, their laughter mixing with the distant sound of a prayer drum. The first stars appear, soft, cautious, undecided. You realize that the night smells different every day, as if it's learning from the past. Historians still debate whether Mughal artisans consciously linked their crafts to philosophy, or whether such connections were the later invention of romantic scholars. Some argue that these parallels between scent and soul, art and devotion, were the natural byproducts of a culture obsessed with refinement. Others suggest the artisans themselves understood more than they ever recorded. Either way, the legacy remains fragrant, the idea that creation, at its purest, is a form of contemplation. You close your eyes, breathing in the faint scent of sandal and rose lingering in the air. The fire has died, but the warmth remains. You think about geometry again, the invisible lines between fragrance, thought, and silence, and how every perfect circle eventually becomes air. Perhaps that's all philosophy really is, learning to vanish beautifully. You stand, stretch, and glance once more at the stills. Tomorrow they will hum again. Tomorrow you will rebuild the same fragrance, follow the same ritual, ask the same quiet questions. And perhaps, if you're lucky, the answers will rise again like steam, unseen, unhurried, and softly fragrant. Outside, the wind changes direction. The scent of rain drifts faintly through the night, though the sky remains dry. You smile. Somewhere, the world is already preparing another perfume. You just have to wait for it to reach you. The lamp flickers. The river sighs, the city exhales. You let your thoughts dissolve in the dark until all that remains is calm. The monsoon returns like an old argument, sudden, dramatic, and unapologetic. The first storm comes without warning. One moment the air is still, heavy enough to press thought flat. The next, it cracks open. Rain tumbles through the streets in silver sheets, rushing into gutters, bouncing off tiles, drumming on every surface like impatient fingers. You stand in your doorway watching, smiling despite yourself. The scent of the world changes instantly. Clay, wet iron, smoke gone sweet. Every storm feels like a cleansing you didn't know you needed. Inside your workshop, the fire hisses in protest as humidity wraps itself around everything. The copper stills sweat. The floor glistens. You move slower, aware that too much haste turns perfume sour. Even air, you think, needs time to remember itself. Azar enters, drenched and grinning, holding a clay pot over his head. "The water you asked for," he says, though half of it is probably rain. You take it anyway. Distillation, like faith, depends on impurities learning to become pure. The still begins its low hum, steam curling from its mouth like a thoughtful sigh. You work in silence, but your mind wanders. To the court, to Faizula's letters, to the philosopher from Lahore who claimed scent has morality. You wonder what he would make of today's air. It smells both innocent and mischievous. Maybe virtue is just dryness pretending to be holy. You chuckle quietly at your own thought and immediately feel wiser, which is always a bad sign. The rain continues all afternoon, relentless. Outside, vendors shout over the downpour, trying to sell roasted corn to anyone brave enough to get wet. You can hear children laughing somewhere near the river, their joy cutting through the noise like light through mist. You envy them, not their freedom, but their ability to notice joy without dissecting it. You used to live that way once, before you started measuring meaning by scent. Here's your historical fact. Mughal perfumers loved the monsoon. Rain changed everything. The smell of soil, the mood of flowers, even the quality of distillation. It was during these months that they made miti attar, the perfume of baked earth. To create it, they would collect clay from near the Ganges, bake it in earthen pans, then distill it with sandalwood oil. The result smelled like the first breath after rain, quiet, grounded, human. Europeans later called it the scent of India. You call it nostalgia bottled. You try making some yourself. The clay hisses as it meets the hot water, the air thickens with smoke and sweetness, and for a moment, everything slows. You close your eyes, inhaling deeply. The smell is humble, familiar, impossibly ancient. It carries no luxury, no ambition, only memory. You think maybe this is what the empire truly smells like when no one's watching. Azar watches you with curiosity. "Master," he says, "this scent, it feels alive." You nod. "It remembers better than we do." He frowns, confused. You explain. "Flowers forget their roots, but soil never does." He smiles, not fully understanding, but willing to let the thought rest. That's good. Some truths only work when they aren't chased. By dusk, the rain thins into drizzle. The world outside glows, rooftops silvered, puddles trembling with reflections of lamps. You open your door to let the air in. The scent of miti attar drifts out, mingling with the damp wind. A passing beggar pauses, sniffs, and says softly, "Ah, that's home." You hand him a small vial without a word. He takes it, bows slightly, and disappears into the rain. The gesture feels right. Perfume belongs to anyone who remembers. You sit by the window watching the storm retreat. The clouds move slowly west, dragging night behind them. You think about the nature of scent again and how it never stays, how it insists on becoming air. Maybe that's why philosophers love it. It behaves like thought. A fragrance can't be seen, only sensed. And once it's gone, it lingers differently for everyone. Maybe that's the closest thing we have to truth. Something invisible, shared, and impossible to keep. Faizullah visits later that week, his shawl damp, his patience thinner than usual. He brings with him a poem written during the storm about how rain reminds the earth of its own softness. He reads it aloud while you pour tea. His voice matches the weather. Warm, tired, sincere. When he finishes, he sighs. "Do you think the emperor ever listens to rain?" You shake your head. "Not unless it's in tune with the court musicians." He laughs, but quietly. You both know there's truth hiding inside the joke. The next day, the emperor's messenger arrives again. Another letter, another commission. This time, the request reads, "A fragrance to remind the court of humility." You nearly laugh aloud. An empire asking for humility bottled. It sounds like a paradox only history could find poetic. Still, you take the challenge. You start with miti attar, earth, pure and honest. Then add a trace of vetiver for coolness, sandal for patience, and just a breath of smoke for transience. The blend feels right, not majestic, not grand, just kind. You call it zameen, the ground. You imagine courtiers wearing it with silk robes, pretending to understand the lesson. But perhaps scent, subtle as it is, will teach quietly what words cannot, an obscure cultural tidbit. In some Mughal courts, guests were offered scented water to wash their hands before meals, symbolizing not just cleanliness, but humility before the act of nourishment. The fragrance was often made from clay and rose petals. The practice faded centuries later, replaced by polished etiquette and unscented silverware. Civilization, it seems, often forgets the simple rituals that kept it gentle. The emperor receives your new creation in silence. The court poet recites a verse about kings who wear the scent of soil. Some courtiers laugh softly, unsure if it's praise or warning. The emperor merely nods and says, "It smells like prayer." You bow, but inside you feel something strange. Not pride, not satisfaction, just a quiet ache. Perhaps humility, when distilled, smells like longing for what once was simple. Historians still debate whether this humility perfume truly existed or was a later invention of chroniclers nostalgic for moral grandeur. Some manuscripts mention a scent used in court rituals symbolizing submission to divine order, but its ingredients remain unknown. Perhaps it was nothing more than sandal and earth. Perhaps it never mattered. The idea itself is perfume enough. That evening, back in your workshop, you sit by the dying lamp. The air smells faintly of clay and sandal. Familiar, grounding, kind. You close your eyes and imagine the scent traveling through the palace, brushing against marble, silks, jeweled curtains. Tiny reminders that all things, no matter how adorned, come from the same soil. You smile to yourself, not because it's profound, but because it's true. You think again of your Sufi friend who once said every fragrance is a metaphor for returning. You didn't believe him then. Now you wonder if he was right. Maybe to live is to evaporate beautifully, and to think is to notice the fragrance as you do. The lamp flickers one last time. Outside, thunder mutters at the horizon, already distant. You breathe in deeply. Rain, soil, smoke, memory. The scent of things learning to end softly. You whisper, "Tomorrow will distill silence." And the world, patient and fragrant, listens. Morning drifts into being with no urgency. It slides rather than rises. The rain has finally left and the air feels rinsed, thinner, more transparent than before. The city breathes like someone recovering from a long fever. Every rooftop glistens. Every wall carries a faint, clean smell of lime and earth. You open your eyes, slowly, aware that even light has a scent. Faintly metallic, faintly sweet, like dust floating through thought. The workshop waits for you, still damp from yesterday's storm. The copper stills are cool again. They gleam dully in the morning haze. You move through the room with quiet familiarity, touching each vessel, each glass vial, each scrap of paper scribbled with notes. The world outside hums faintly, but in here, time feels paused, as though sound itself is waiting to see what you'll make next. You light a small lamp. The wick catches reluctantly, flaring once before steadying into calm. You promised yourself you'd distill silence today. Of course, silence doesn't exist as an ingredient. It has no roots, no petals, no measurable density. But you've learned that impossibility is only an invitation. If thought can have fragrance, then why not quiet? You sit on the floor sketching imaginary recipes in your notebook. 2 parts stillness, 1 part breath, a trace of patience. It looks absurd on paper, but so do most beginnings. Azar enters, curious. "Master, what scent is silence?" he asks, setting down a bundle of cedar chips. You smile. "We'll find out when it stops talking." He laughs nervously, unsure if it's a joke. You don't explain. The lesson will be in the making. You start with the simplest ingredients: sandalwood for calm, cedar for structure, a faint hint of rose for presence. You choose no fire today, only slow evaporation. The air should do the work. You crush the woods by hand, mix them with water, and let them sit in the copper, still without flame. It's a strange sight, a distillation that refuses to boil. But you know that silence, like understanding, prefers to unfold without heat. Hours pass in gentle stillness. The city beyond the walls grows louder. Merchants, carts, temple bells. But inside the workshop, only the soft creak of wood and the faint sound of water moving against metal. You close your eyes. The scent emerging is subtle, hesitant, almost shy. It smells like distance, like a pause between words. You realize how rarely the world gives itself permission to smell like nothing. Here's your historical fact. Mughal artisans often created scents for meditation, not luxury. In some Sufi lodges, perfumed oils were burned before dawn prayers, their smoke intended to quiet the mind and make breath conscious. One such blend, Chandan Wadup, mixed sandalwood and frankincense in equal parts, believed to settle the chatter of the soul. The formulas were rarely written down. Fragrance, they said, was best understood through practice, not inheritance. You think about that while watching the vapor drift lazily from the still's mouth. Maybe silence isn't the absence of sound. Maybe it's the fragrance that lingers after noise decides to rest. You whisper this thought aloud, and Ajar glances up. "Did you say something?" he asks. You shake your head. Just listening. The afternoon crawls. Sunlight cuts through the workshop window in a slow-moving beam, illuminating the tiny motes of dust. They dance in lazy spirals like philosophers too sleepy to finish their arguments. You remember your old Sufi friend telling you that God hides in repetition, in the pulse of breath, the rhythm of work, the stillness between heartbeats. You didn't believe him then, you almost do now. You write another line in your notebook. To make silence fragrant, one must distill patience. You smile at your own handwriting. It looks older than you remember. A traveller arrives at dusk, a stranger wrapped in a rain-stained shawl, carrying the smell of roads and horses. He introduces himself as a scholar from Persia, studying the language of scent. You offer him tea, and he accepts with a grateful nod. His hands are calloused from travel, but gentle when he lifts the cup. "I heard of your perfumes," he says softly. "They say you make air think." You laugh modestly. "Air does the thinking, I only listen." He studies your stills, your vials, the faint vapor rising from your newest experiment. "What scent is this?" he asks. "It has no name," you reply. "It's silence, or trying to be." The scholar closes his eyes, inhales deeply, and remains quiet for a long time. When he opens them, there's something like awe there. "You have caught the space between breaths," he murmurs. "Not many remember how that smells." You pour him a small vial as a gift. He takes it carefully as if holding a thought that might flee. Before leaving, he bows slightly. "In my country," he says, "we believe silence is not emptiness but fullness too vast for words. You have given it shape." He leaves before you can reply. The door swings shut, and the sound of rain returns faintly in the distance. You sit by the window looking out at the sky. The clouds have broken into strips of orange and grey. Birds drift homeward, their wings wet with twilight. The air smells faintly of cedar and rose, calm but alive. You realize the experiment has worked, not because you bottled silence, but because you learned to hear it. An obscure cultural tidbit. In some Mughal manuscripts, descriptions of ideal gatherings mention quiet perfume, a term for fragrances so subtle they could only be noticed when one stopped speaking. Such scents were said to encourage humility in conversation. Poets used the same idea metaphorically, praising lovers whose presence was perfume without sound. It was both compliment and confession. Night deepens. You extinguish the lamp and step outside. The lane is wet, the stones slick. The city hums in soft murmurs, vendors packing up, prayer calls overlapping, laughter drifting from a nearby tea stall. You walk toward the river. The Yamuna looks black tonight, its surface broken by faint ripples of reflected light. You sit on the steps, breathing the air slowly. Every scent feels like a sentence finishing itself. You think about the scholar's words, silence as fullness. Maybe that's the true nature of perfume, to fill absence with presence so gentle it doesn't disturb. You wonder if thought works the same way, meaning forming quietly between sensations. You've spent years distilling flowers and wood, but perhaps you've been distilling yourself all along, reducing noise into essence. Historians still debate whether perfumers of the Mughal era genuinely considered their work spiritual, or if this notion came later through romantic storytelling. The records are fragmentary, full of poetry and receipts, not philosophy. But it hardly matters. Every trade becomes meditation if done with enough attention. You stay by the river until the moon climbs high. The water smells faintly of silt and light. The city has fallen mostly silent now, except for the occasional bark of a distant dog. You close your eyes, breathing deeply. There is no rose, no sandal, no musk. Only air, wet and infinite. And in that breath, you find something close to peace. You whisper to yourself, maybe silence is the scent of understanding. The words vanish as soon as you say them, absorbed by night. But you know they'll return tomorrow, faint but steady, like fragrance on skin long after it's washed away. The river sighs, the air stills. You stay a while longer, waiting for the quiet to settle completely, until it's hard to tell where thought ends and rest begins. The next morning carries the scent of smoke and dust, the kind that clings to everything even before the city wakes. The rain has gone, leaving the streets pale and cracked, their puddles now small mirrors for passing clouds. You rise slowly, feeling the stiffness of too many quiet nights, spent thinking instead of sleeping. Silence, it turns out, is heavy when carried too long. In the workshop, Ajar is already awake, tending to the fire. The boy hums softly, his voice thin but steady, like the opening line of a prayer. You watch him for a while, realizing how much he's grown. Not in height, but in rhythm. His movements are sure now. He stirs, measures, adjusts. He knows what each sound in the still means. You taught him patience, but now he practices it better than you. Today you tell him you'll make something new. Not for the emperor, not for the poets, not for anyone who keeps records. This one will be for forgetting. He looks at you, puzzled. Forgetting what? You shrug. Whatever asks to be forgotten. You grind amber and saffron together, mixing them with the faint bitterness of myrrh. The air thickens immediately, warm and golden. The scent feels nostalgic, though you can't say for what. Maybe childhood. Maybe peace. Maybe the way the world smelled before you learned to describe it. You pour water slowly, listening to it hiss as it meets the heated copper. The vapor rises in swirls, almost playful. For a moment, the air feels lighter, like memory dissolving before it can sting. You think of miti atar, of humility, of silence. All the perfumes you've made, trying to name something unseen. Maybe this one doesn't need a name at all. Maybe the point is to let it evaporate before it can be remembered. Here's your historical fact. Among the Mughal nobility, perfumes were often used not only to attract, but to console. Historical letters mention widows who requested their chambers be perfumed daily with amber and rose, believing scent could ease grief's heaviness. In some cases, mourners burned musk and agar wood for 40 days, one for each step of the soul's journey through memory. To smell was to remember, and to remember was to ache. You wonder if forgetting ever had its own fragrance, something clean without story. By noon, the workshop fills with the scent. It's rich, calm, forgiving. Ajar sits near the window, fanning himself, half drowsy. It smells like endings, he says. You smile. Good, then it's working. You dip a thin reed into the cooling liquid and touch it to your wrist. The scent opens slowly, coming not bright, not dark, just warm. You feel it settle into your skin, blending with your pulse. For a moment, everything you've made, everyone you've met, every word you've written seems to fade into that single fragrance. You walk outside. The sun has turned sharp again, drawing thin lines of shadow across the lane. A few neighbors nod as you pass. One woman sells garlands of marigold, their color defiant against the pale dust. A man mends a broken cart, his hammer tapping out a rhythm older than patience. The ordinary world keeps moving, and that somehow feels comforting. You make your way to the edge of the river. The Yamuna looks quieter today, its surface rippling with slow, lazy confidence. You sit on the stone steps and watch a group of washermen beating clothes against the rocks. Each strike sends up a mist that smells faintly of soap and clay. Life, you realize, is full of small violences that keep things clean. Faizullah finds you there an hour later, his robe wrinkled, his face bright with the satisfaction of having thought too much. "You've heard the news?" he asks breathlessly. "The court philosopher has died." You shake your head. "Heart or hubris?" "A little of both, probably," he replies. "The emperor is looking for someone new, someone who understands both science and the soul." He grins at you. "Sound familiar?" You laugh softly. "Tell His Majesty I'm too busy distilling humility." He smiles, but there's disappointment behind it. "You could teach them something," he says. "About patience, maybe." You glance at the river. They wouldn't smell it. He sits beside you. You both watch a boat drift past, slow and uneven. The oars cut the water like old sentences, deliberate but uncertain. The silence between you is easy, the way it is between people who've learned not to force words into meaning. Finally, he says, "Do you ever wish you'd done something else?" You think about it. Everything else smells worse. He laughs, and the sound floats out over the water. An obscure cultural tidbit. Some Mughal mystics believed that forgetting was a sacred act, not neglect, but surrender. They wrote of Yadifana, the remembrance of annihilation, the sweet relief of letting the self dissolve like incense smoke. In a few rare rituals, devotees burned specific herbs said to perfume the absence, symbolizing the beauty of erasure. History, as usual, didn't preserve the recipe. You return home by twilight, the air has cooled, the lane glows with small lamps, their flames reflected in puddles from the previous night's rain. You can hear laughter spilling from doorways, smell lentils simmering, hear songs half forgotten by tired singers. The city feels alive in its ordinariness. You realize, walking back, that forgetting is not erasure. It's simply learning to notice what remains. Back in your workshop, the still is quiet. The perfume you made earlier sits waiting in a glass vial, golden and calm. You pick it up, swirl it once, and the scent blooms again. Amber, saffron, and something else. Something like release. You pour a few drops onto the floor, letting the fragrance rise into the room. For a moment, the air itself feels lighter, as though relieved of memory. Azhar watches you from the doorway. "Why waste it, master?" he asks. You smile. "It's not waste, it's practice." He tilts his head. "For what?" you reply. "For letting go beautifully." You sit down by the lamp, notebook open. The page smells faintly of rose and smoke. You write slowly. Forgetting is the gentlest form of wisdom. It's how the world remembers to rest. Historians still debate whether artisans like you ever left writings that blurred the line between craft and philosophy. A few fragments survive, short aphorisms written in Urdu and Persian, anonymous, unsigned. One reads, "The scent of things forgotten is the soul's reward." Scholars attribute it to everyone and no one. You like to think that's appropriate. Night folds over the city. The lamp burns low. You stretch, bones tired, heart easy. The scent of the day lingers. Faint, sweet, vanishing. You whisper to yourself, perhaps forgetting is the empire's most faithful perfume. Then, with quiet satisfaction, you close your eyes and let the night take over. The river outside murmurs softly. The stars blink like old promises. Somewhere in the distance, the emperor sneezes and the courtly world of meaning goes on, none the wiser. You smile in the dark. The air smells of endings, and that feels right. The next day begins with the smell of burnt wood. It's not unpleasant, just sharp enough to wake thought, like an argument whispered too close to your ear. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a baker's kiln has misbehaved again. The smoke drifts lazily across rooftops, curling into thin grey threads, before disappearing into the warming air. You step outside, still drowsy, and breathe it in. There's something comforting about imperfection first thing in the morning. It makes the day feel more human. You return to the workshop, where Azhar is already at work, grinding sandalwood into powder. He looks focused, the way only youth can be, before life introduces irony. The smell fills the room slowly, round and golden, softening the edge of the burnt air outside. You sit near the window, notebook in hand, staring at the blank page. It's been days since you've written anything. You're not sure if that's laziness or peace. The stills gleam in the early light. The air hums with quiet, a kind of slow expectancy. You think of the scholar from Persia, his words about silence being fullness. Maybe he was right, but fullness has weight. You can feel it in your chest. You wonder if silence ever exhausts itself. Azhar interrupts your drifting thoughts with a question. "Master, why do we burn things to make them beautiful?" He gestures toward the little brazier where you sometimes warm herbs before distilling them. You look at him and smile. Because change smells better than stasis. He tilts his head, not entirely convinced. You add, "Smoke is proof that transformation doesn't come quietly. Here's your historical fact. The Mughals used smoke deliberately, not just in cooking or ritual, but as fragrance. A practice called bakurdani, the art of perfuming clothes and spaces with smoke, was common among nobles and mystics alike. Mixtures of frankincense, agar wood, and sugar were burned in small metal censers, their smoke used to scent fabrics, manuscripts, even beards. The belief was simple. Smoke carried intention where words could not. You've always liked that idea that air can remember direction. When you were a child, your mother used to wave her hands through the kitchen smoke, saying it would carry blessings to those far away. You didn't believe her then, but now you make your living out of invisible messages. You set up a new experiment. Thin shavings of sandalwood, a few drops of honey, and a pinch of clove. The mixture smoulders, releasing smoke that smells both sweet and solemn. It reminds you of old temples, or maybe forgotten promises. The scent curls through the air, soft at first, then insistently present. Ajar watches as it twists into vague shapes before fading. "It's like a story," he says. You nod. Yes, the kind that ends before you understand it. You walk outside to let the air clear. The lane is bright now, the morning fully awake. Merchants call out prices. Children chase each other with wooden wheels. The city's noise returns like a tide. You lean against the doorframe, watching it all, thinking that smoke and sound share the same fate. Both vanish as they rise. You can't help but smile at how much the world resembles your work. Faizullah arrives soon after, his robe reeking of travel and misplaced metaphors. "I've been reading something," he says, before even sitting down. A philosopher from Shiraz claims that scent is the body's memory of the divine. You raise an eyebrow. "Then what's smoke?" "Regret, probably," he replies. You laugh, genuinely. "Then we must be saints." You pour tea, the steam adding its own layer of fragrance to the room. Faizullah talks about his new poem, a piece he calls Gubar, meaning dust. He recites a few lines. The words drift easily, almost transparent. One of them lingers. "The soul is the smoke of patience, rising from the fire of time." You repeat it quietly. It sounds truer than you want to admit. By late afternoon, the light changes. The sun thickens into gold. The workshop glows like amber from within. You spend the hour collecting ash from the morning's experiment, storing it in a small glass jar. You're not sure why. Maybe you just like keeping evidence that transformation happened. The jar looks ordinary, but inside it lies proof of something once fragrant, now stilled. An obscure cultural tidbit. In some old households of North India, ashes from perfumed smoke were used as medicine, believed to heal wounds and calm fevers. Mixed with ghee, they became an ointment for restlessness, a salve for overthinking. The logic was simple but tender. If scent could calm the spirit, its remnants could soothe the body. You find that oddly comforting. Maybe the cure for thought has always been what remains after it burns. As evening falls, you light another brazier, this time with nothing but air and memory. You let it burn until the smoke fades into nothing. The workshop grows dim. Ajar has long gone home, leaving his tools neatly arranged. You sit alone, surrounded by the faint ghosts of every scent that's ever passed through these walls. The silence feels familiar again, heavy but kind. You take your notebook and write, "Smoke is instruction." It teaches how to rise, how to fade, and how to perfume the space between. The ink dries slowly. The words look older than your hand. You close the book, lean back, and listen to the small creaks of the cooling metal. Historians still debate whether Mughal perfumers treated smoke as art or as ritual. Some records suggest it was simply habit, a way to refresh garments or banish insects. Others claim it was symbolic, a physical act of devotion, a reminder that all things must pass through fire to reveal their essence. You prefer the second version, though you know history rarely chooses poetry over practicality. You step outside again. Night has arrived quietly, settling over the city like soot. The stars hide behind a thin veil of haze. The air smells faintly of burning sugar and damp earth. Somewhere nearby, someone is cooking bread. The scent folds into the smoke, turning hunger into warmth. You breathe deeply, letting it all mix. The memory of sandalwood, the bitterness of clove, the sweetness of life continuing. The world exhales, and you follow its lead. For a moment you imagine the city itself is one great brazier, every life a piece of incense slowly surrendering its fragrance to the dark. It's not a sad thought, it's just true. You close your eyes. The air moves softly across your face. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. You think of your mother again, waving her hands through kitchen smoke, blessing the unseen. You do the same now, a small motion, half ritual, half remembrance, and smile. The smoke accepts it. Inside, the brazier goes out, leaving only the faintest thread of scent. It smells like warmth, learning how to leave gracefully. You sit down, resting your head against the cool wall, and whisper, "Lesson learned." The night hums in response. The city breathes. And you, tired but content, let the last of the smoke carry your thoughts wherever they wish to drift. You wake to the sound of drums. They echo down the narrow lanes like thunder caught in a hallway. Slow, ceremonial, impatient. Ajar bursts through the door before you can rise, face flushed with excitement. "Master," he says, panting, "the Emperor is coming to Agra." You blink. The Emperor never comes to Agra anymore. He sends orders, not footsteps. "Are you sure?" you ask. Ajar nods so fast you can almost hear it. Everyone's saying it. The court's moving for the summer. They say he wants to smell the gardens again. You sigh. Power always rediscovers nostalgia at the most inconvenient times. The stills have barely cooled from yesterday's experiments, but already your mind begins rearranging plans. Royal visits mean opportunities and expectations that smell expensive. Ajar looks at you hopefully. "Will we be called?" You smile. "If they've run out of patience, probably." He laughs, but nervously. You can feel the mix of pride and dread settling into the room. The Emperor's presence is both blessing and burden, like musk, intoxicating, but it stains everything it touches. By midday, the streets are alive with preparation. Soldiers shout orders, shopkeepers scrub their walls, beggars disappear as if rehearsed. The city, always theatrical, remembers its lines. You watch from your doorway as garlands are hung, banners unfurled, dust swept into neat piles. Even the air feels rehearsed. You wonder whether the Emperor notices any of this or if all celebration smells the same from his throne. Faizullah arrives, carrying a scroll and his usual smirk. He's commissioning a new fragrance, he announces before sitting down. A personal one, for meditation, they say. You raise an eyebrow. Meditation or vanity? He shrugs. Does it matter? He's paying. You laugh softly. They all are, one way or another. The poet unfolds the scroll and reads aloud the imperial request. A fragrance for contemplation. For the space between thought and command, it must remind the air that even kings are dust. You whistle. That's either humility or marketing. Faizullah grins. Both, I think. You sit in silence for a while, feeling the weight of the request. The Emperor wants to smell mortality without tasting it. He wants philosophy that fits in a bottle. You can't decide whether that's absurd or profound, maybe both. You look at the stills, their dull reflections watching you back. We'll try, you say. But this one will need to be honest. Here's your historical fact. Shah Jahan, after the death of Mumtaz Mahal, reportedly commissioned special perfumes to be burned daily near her tomb. Subtle blends of sandal, rose and amber, meant to soothe the the walls of grief. Later, during his own confinement, he demanded those same scents be sent to his chambers, saying they reminded him that memory could be merciful. Fragrance, for the Mughal elite, was not vanity. It was theology in disguise. You begin at dusk. Azhar grinds sandalwood with care while you prepare a basin of distilled water. You decide this perfume will have no sweetness. No rose, no jasmine, no frivolity. Just gravity, smoke, earth, and faint citrus. Something that breathes dignity and fatigue at once. You call it Saya, the Shadow. It's not meant to impress, it's meant to linger behind thought. As the distillation begins, the workshop fills with the scent of cedar and rain-soaked bark. It's clean, but melancholy, like old libraries or honest goodbyes. Azhar watches you mix, his face serious. "This doesn't smell royal," he says. "That's why it might work," you reply. You pour the liquid slowly, watching steam rise like unspoken truth. The scent feels alive in a quiet way, as if it's learning to listen. An obscure cultural tidbit. In some Mughal rituals, kings anointed themselves with a single drop of scent before entering court, not for luxury, but for composure. The belief was that fragrance calmed the ego and reminded rulers of their mortality. Chroniclers wrote that Akbar once refused to wear perfume for a week, saying he wished to see how power smells unadorned. He reportedly changed his mind by the third day. The next morning, the emperor's guards arrive to collect your creation. They are polite, but distant, their armor gleaming like discipline. One of them, a younger soldier with kind eyes, leans close and whispers, "He hasn't slept in days." You hand him the vial of Saya without comment. The liquid inside glows faintly amber, steady as breath. Hours pass. The city waits. From your doorway, you watch sunlight drift lazily across the rooftops, slicing time into golden pieces. Every now and then, a gust of wind carries faint traces of sandal and cedar from the palace direction. You imagine your fragrance wandering through marble corridors, mingling with incense, maybe even reaching the emperor's pulse. That evening, another messenger arrives. This one older, slower, careful with his words. He bows deeply before speaking. "His Majesty thanks you," he says, "and requests that you visit the palace tomorrow." Azhar's eyes widen. You nod calmly, though your heart beats faster than you'd like. You've spent years perfecting invisibility. Now recognition feels almost intrusive. The night before the visit, you don't sleep. You sit by the lamp, watching its flame tremble with every draught. The air smells faintly of the last batch of Saya, now cooling in its copper cradle. You think of what it means to offer scent to a man who already owns the air. Maybe humility is the only honest perfume left. You whisper to yourself, "Let him smell the silence beneath it." At dawn you walk to the palace. The road is clean, unnervingly so. Soldiers stand like punctuation marks between the pauses of traffic. The palace itself rises like the idea of permanence. White marble reflecting a sky too bright for truth. Inside, everything smells controlled. Rosewater, polished stone, discipline. They lead you through long corridors into a quiet chamber. The emperor sits alone, draped in soft muslin, his beard streaked with silver. His eyes, sharp and tired, study you as you bow. "You made this?" he asks. You nod. "And what did you intend it to say?" You think carefully before answering. That even fragrance ends. He looks at you for a long moment, unreadable. Then he gestures for the servant to open the vial. The scent releases. Slow, deliberate. The emperor inhales deeply. His eyes soften just enough to remind you he's still human. It smells like rain after prayer, he says quietly, or memory without pain. He sets the vial down. You may go, he adds, but his tone isn't dismissal. It's gratitude disguised as fatigue. You bow again, step back, and leave the chamber with your pulse ringing in your ears. Outside, the day has turned golden and loud again. Faizullah finds you near the garden gates, grinning. Well, he asks. Did he smile? You shrug. Almost. He laughs. That's worth 1,000 coins. You nod, though what you feel isn't pride. It's relief. You've bottled truth, and it didn't break anyone. That night, the city smells faintly of your creation. Maybe the palace fires carried it outward. Maybe the air just remembered. You sit on the steps of your workshop watching the moon rise. The world looks washed as if recently forgiven. Historians still debate whether artisans ever met emperors directly or if such encounters were later romantic embellishments. Chroniclers wrote sparingly about the lives behind the luxury, but one surviving record mentions a scent maker whose creations were known to make the air pause. No name was given. You find that anonymity appropriate. The lamp burns down, the air cools, the scent of cedar still lingers, faint but steady. You think of the emperor's face, the way he closed his eyes when he inhaled. You wonder if, in that moment, he truly felt his own shadow. You smile, whisper to the dark. Power always smells better when it remembers what fades. Then you close the door, letting the night reclaim its air. The river sighs somewhere beyond the walls, and for a long, silent while, even the city seems to breathe in rhythm with your thought. The morning after your visit to the palace, you wake later than usual. The city outside your window feels lighter, almost relieved, as though the emperor's presence has exhaled and left room for ordinary life again. For the first time in weeks, you hear laughter from the market before the hour of breakfast. The bells of the sweet sellers sound brighter, the pigeons less judgmental. You stretch, breathe, and for the first time in a long while, feel no urgency to work. Azhar greets you with tea already steeped, proud of himself. You're famous now, he announces. You smile sleepily. Fame smells like paperwork. He looks confused. Paperwork? You nod. Letters, requests, people who want you to make the same miracle twice. You take the tea, sip it slowly, and look toward the sunlight creeping across the floor. Miracles, you say, shouldn't be made to repeat themselves. But he's right. Fame has found you. Before noon, 3 different courtiers send messages asking for perfumes inspired by the emperor's reflection. One even offers a ruby in payment, as if gems and gratitude weigh the same. You thank them politely and decline. I'm taking a rest, you write in every reply. Philosophy requires patience. That afternoon, you walk beyond the walls of Agra into the outskirts where gardens stretch like green sighs under the sun. You haven't been this far in months. The road smells of grass and dust, of wet bark and warm leaves. Somewhere ahead, water murmurs faintly through channels carved with impossible precision. The Mughals built these gardens to imitate paradise, square in design, divided by running water, filled with flowers that never agreed to bloom in order. You love that last part most. Even perfection needs rebellion. You pass through an arched gate, its top fringed with faded blue tile, and enter what's left of one such garden. Once, this would have been a royal retreat. Now it's mostly forgotten. A few gardeners tending marigolds and jasmine, a fountain dry but dignified. The air here is thick with pollen and sunlight. You breathe it in slowly. For the first time in days, you feel anonymous again. You find a shaded spot under a neem tree and sit down. The world smells warm, patient, generous. Bees hum lazily around the marigolds. A breeze stirs the leaves. For a long time, you don't think. You just exist, quietly, like something freshly distilled. Here's your historical fact. The Mughal concept of paradise, Jannat, was modelled in architecture through gardens called charbagh, divided into 4 parts by water channels symbolising milk, honey, wine and clear water. Every element carried a fragrance: roses and narcissus by the canals, citrus near the pavilions, jasmine at the corners for the night air. The geometry of faith rendered in soil and scent. Gardens were not decoration, they were theology made visible and breathable. You take a slow breath and close your eyes. You imagine those 4 rivers, each scented differently, flowing through the air. You imagine walking among them barefoot, letting fragrance become language. Maybe paradise isn't reward, you think. Maybe it's memory, perfectly arranged. Footsteps interrupt your reverie. You open your eyes to see Faizullah approaching, a scroll tucked under his arm, his expression half amusement, half fatigue. "Hiding?" he asks. You smile. "Resting." "Ah," he says, sitting beside you, "the noblest form of hiding." He unrolls his scroll. "I wrote something," he says, "about you." You groan. That's never good news. He ignores the protest and begins reading. The poem is simple, almost too gentle. It speaks of a man who turns air into prayer, who measures wisdom in scent, who teaches patience to fire. You listen, quietly, and when he finishes, you feel something rare, the brief, awkward warmth of being seen. "You made me sound like I understand myself," you say softly. He smiles. "That's what poets do. We lie politely." You both laugh. The sound startles a pair of doves into flight. Their wings catch the light, scattering dust like glittering thought. "You should build your own garden someday," Faizullah says. "Fill it with your scents instead of flowers." You look around. "Maybe this one already is." He looks puzzled. You gesture to the air. Everything that ever lived has left something here. The soil remembers more than we do. He nods, quiet again. The 2 of you sit in companionable silence, watching the light shift across the courtyard. It feels like being inside a thought that doesn't mind taking its time. An obscure cultural tidbit. In some Mughal gardens, perfumers would scent the water channels during festivals, pouring rosewater and sandal essence into the streams so that mist rising from the fountains would carry fragrance into the air. Travellers wrote of walking through gardens that smelled alive, as if breathing. The act was temporary, extravagant, and utterly impractical, which of course made it perfect. As afternoon leans toward evening, Faizullah leaves, promising to bring you his next poem when it's bad enough to improve with scent. You stay behind, alone again. The garden quiets, the last bees wobble homeward. The wind turns cooler, carrying hints of river and night. You think about the emperor again, about Sire the shadow. You wonder whether he ever walks his gardens alone and lets himself feel small beneath the sky. You wonder if power ever allows humility to bloom. Probably not. But maybe scent teaches what titles forget. You take out a small vial of leftover perfume from your pocket and pour a few drops into the dry fountain. The scent rises immediately, mingling with the evening air. Cedar, rain, the faintest whisper of citrus. It feels right. The fountain may be dry, but it still remembers how to reflect. Historians still debate whether the Mughals truly intended their gardens as living metaphors for paradise, or if later writers romanticized them. But anyone who has ever walked among those quadrants of water and shade knows the truth doesn't matter. You can feel divinity in the geometry, in the balance between order and growth. The first call to prayer drifts across the fields. Birds settle. The horizon melts into copper. You watch the day end without hurry, the scent of sandalwood still lingering faintly on your sleeve. You realize this is what peace smells like. Not absence of noise, but balance between things that could have been louder. When you finally rise to leave, the wind shifts again, carrying the perfume you poured across the garden. Somewhere, it will reach the Emperor's senses without him knowing why the air feels kinder. You smile at the thought. The best lessons, like fragrance, are absorbed unconsciously. You walk home slowly, the path dim but familiar. The city lights flicker awake one by one like small acknowledgements of continuity. By the time you reach your door, the moon is up, white and watchful. You pause before entering, taking one last deep breath. The night smells of earth and possibility. You whisper. Even paradise fades when left unscented. Then you step inside, light your lamp, and let the air rest beside you. The flame steadies. The stills gleam. The world exhales. And for a moment, you feel exactly where you're meant to be. Between work and wonder, between thought and air. You begin waking earlier now, not from obligation, but because the morning air feels too honest to waste. The hour before sunrise has a texture to it, like thin silk stretched across breath. The streets outside are quiet, only the distant splash of someone drawing water, the faint rhythm of a broom brushing stone. You light the lamp and open the shutters, letting the pale blue dawn seep into the workshop. It smells faintly metallic, like the edge of thought before it sharpens. Azhar arrives soon after, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He's taller now, voice deeper, but still manages to look perpetually surprised by mornings. You hand him a cup of tea and gesture toward a bundle on the table. "Letters?" you say. "All for you." He blinks. "Me?" "Mostly for me," you correct, "but since you read faster than I think, you can help." The letters are written on fine paper, sealed in red wax, smelling faintly of rose and ambition. Requests mostly. Courtiers, merchants, travellers from far-off lands. Everyone seems to want a piece of the air you've learned to tame. You open one at random. A scent for courage before speech. Another. Something that smells like peace but sells like power. You close them quietly, stack them neatly, and sigh. The world, you say, has confused fragrance with reassurance. Azhar grins. And aren't they the same? Only until the wind changes, you reply. You decide to answer one letter from a scholar in Kashmir who writes in precise, trembling Urdu. His words are gentle, his curiosity sincere. "I have heard that fragrance can shape thought. Is that true, or just poetry pretending to be science?" You smile. Finally, a question worth thinking about. Here's your historical fact. The Mughal courts were home to an astonishing network of correspondence. Poets, scholars, artisans exchanging letters across provinces, their ink carrying ideas faster than trade routes could carry goods. Many perfumers, though not formally educated, wrote in riddles and metaphors describing scents as letters of the invisible. Some of these writings survive, though half are unsigned. It seems even intellect prefers to travel anonymously. You begin writing your reply. "Dear seeker of invisible things," you start. Fragrance doesn't shape thought, but it reminds thought that it has a body. It teaches memory how to breathe. You pause, smiling at the absurdity of explaining what cannot be pinned down. Still you continue. "The nose is just the mind's most polite historian. It forgets nothing, forgives almost everything." Azhar leans over your shoulder, reading aloud the next line as you write it. "So the answer is yes and no, and it depends on the weather." He laughs. "That's not very helpful." It's the only kind of honesty we can afford, you say. You seal the letter, drizzle a drop of sandal oil on the wax, and hand it to him. Take it to the post rider. He hesitates. We're really sending it? Of course, you say. Every thought deserves an audience, even if it's uphill. The morning unfolds quietly. You clean the stills, arrange the bottles by colour instead of function. A small act of rebellion against efficiency. The scent of yesterday's cedar lingers faintly, mixing with the sweetness of warm metal. Ajar hums as he works, a tune that might be from a love song or a prayer. You've stopped trying to tell the difference. A knock interrupts the rhythm. Faizullah enters, smiling like someone who's about to deliver bad news, as if it were dessert. I have a favour, he announces. You groan. You always do. He laughs. Not for me, for a widow in the Poets' Quarter. She wants something to scent her late husband's manuscripts. She says the paper has forgotten how to breathe. You nod. Bring the pages. He hesitates. They're heavy. Then bring one, you say. He returns an hour later with a single sheet, its edges brittle, its ink faded into the colour of tired rain. The poem is incomplete. A few lines about the scent of winter fruit, something about longing that refuses to die quietly. You read it silently, then lift it to your nose. It smells of old dust and unspoken kindness. You look up. We'll give it new air, you say. You mix a faint solution of myrrh, bergamot and musk, delicate, barely present. You hold the page above the rising vapour. The words darken slightly as if remembering themselves. When you hand it back, Faizullah closes his eyes and breathes. It smells alive again, he whispers. You've made grief hospitable. You shake your head. No, just visible. An obscure cultural tidbit. In some Mughal libraries, perfumers were employed to scent the bindings of royal manuscripts. It was believed that fragrant pages invited knowledge to linger longer in the mind. Some scholars even claimed they could recall a book's contents by scent alone. Imagine remembering truth by the way it smelled. As the day fades, you sit by the window watching the light turn thin and honey-coloured. The air outside hums with the rhythm of evening, sandals on stone, a cowbell, laughter. You take out a clean sheet of paper and begin writing again. This time, not a reply, but a thought for yourself. Scent is the handwriting of time. Every moment leaves a trace. We breathe it, and it writes us back. You pause, reading the line aloud. It sounds strange, like a thought too honest for company. You fold it neatly, place it inside a small glass bottle, and seal it with wax. Ajar watches, curious. Is that a new recipe? He asks. A letter, you reply. To whom? To the air, you say. He laughs. And do you think it will answer? You look out at the darkening sky, the faint trail of smoke from distant kitchens curling like script across the horizon. It already does, you whisper. Night settles softly. You light a single lamp, the same one that's watched you through 100 experiments, 100 moods. Its flame flickers against the glass shelves, making the bottles glow like captured thoughts. You sit there quietly, listening to the city exhale. Historians still debate whether Mughal perfumers considered their art a form of communication, letters written to gods or to emperors or to themselves. What's certain is that some vials were never opened, their contents left to evaporate naturally over time. Perhaps they were prayers too private for words, or messages sent into air with no address. You watch your own sealed bottle on the table. The wax cools, the light shifts. Somewhere in that small space your thought dissolves, becoming part of the room's invisible script. You imagine centuries from now, someone opening it and catching the faintest hint of sandal and ink, wondering what you meant. You smile at the absurd beauty of it. Then you lean back, close your eyes, and whisper, "Everything we write finds its reader eventually." Outside, the wind stirs, and for a moment you could swear it smells like agreement. You wake to noise, not unpleasant noise, the kind that belongs to life getting ready. Someone shouting about figs, another about copper pots, the steady rhythm of hooves on stone. The market has bloomed overnight, unfurling like a great loud flower across the street. Ajhar's already at the window, eyes wide, thrilled by the chaos. "Master, it's festival week," he says. You yawn. "Festival? What are we celebrating this time?" He grins. "Everything, I think." You step outside. The air is thick with spice and dust, laughter and bargaining. Incense burns somewhere unseen. The smell of cardamom fights with roasted almonds, and both lose to fried dough. It's the kind of day that smells alive enough to make history feel irrelevant. Stalls stretch as far as you can see, garlands of marigold, piles of cloth so bright they hum, clay toys painted like small prayers. You move slowly through it all, hands clasped behind your back, pretending you're invisible. You aren't. Vendors recognize you now. Ustad, they call you, master of scents, maker of air. One woman selling saffron waves a handful toward you. "For your perfumes," she shouts. You smile, but decline. "Today I'm only buying memories." She laughs. "Then you'll leave with nothing and everything." You stop at a stall selling glass bottles, delicate things in shades of blue and green. The merchant tells you they were blown near the desert, by men who inhale sand and exhale art. You buy one without haggling. Ajhar frowns. "It's empty," he says. You nod. "That's what makes it perfect. Here's your historical fact. During the height of the Mughal period, Agra's markets were considered among the most aromatic places on earth. Travellers wrote of streets filled with perfume sellers, their shelves lined with attars of rose, vetiver, jasmine, and amber. Some stalls were so fragrant that they claimed even the air seemed to sell itself. Perfume wasn't luxury. It was currency, ritual, and gossip all at once. You pass one such stall now. A man with a hennid beard sits behind rows of small flasks, each glowing with captured sunlight. "For lovers," he says, waving one. "For scholars." He lifts another. "For sleep." He lifts a third and looks you in the eye. "For remembering what shouldn't be remembered." You pause. "How much?" He smiles. "For you, a story." He uncorks the bottle. The scent is soft, rose touched with smoke. Something familiar but unplaceable. "This," he says, "was made by a perfumer who believed that every scent had a shadow. He spent his life trying to find them. The after-smells of memory, the ghosts of fragrance. When he died, his apprentices burned his notes. They said he'd gone too far." You inhale again. It smells like something left unfinished. "So what is this?" you ask. The man shrugs. Maybe what he was looking for. You buy the bottle. Not because you believe him, but because curiosity is a cheap addiction. Ajhar keeps pace beside you, distracted by sweets and colours. "Master," he says through a mouthful of syrup, "can a smell lie?" You look around at the bright, crowded street. All the best ones do. By afternoon, the heat presses down like a thought that refuses to leave. You return home, the market's echoes still clinging to your clothes. The workshop feels cooler, the air inside patient again. You set the new bottle on the table and uncork it. The scent drifts out slowly, like memory walking back into a room uninvited. It's soft, complicated, slightly bitter. You can't tell if it's comforting or sad. Maybe both. You sit down, watching the air change. Ajar hovers nearby, waiting for instruction. "What is it?" he asks. You shake your head. A question. About what? About what lingers. You think of all the sense you've made. For emperors, poets, widows, letters, silence. Each one was supposed to end somewhere, yet all of them keep returning, faintly, like echoes that refuse closure. Maybe that's the point. Maybe scent isn't about presence, but persistence, an obscure cultural tidbit. There was once a Mughal superstition that if a perfume faded too quickly, it meant the maker had trapped an impatient spirit inside. Some perfumers even performed small rituals before distilling, burning sugar, whispering to the fire, asking for permission from unseen guests. The scent that lingered longest was said to have pleased the spirits best. You look again at the bottle from the market. The air around it feels heavier now, as though listening. You whisper, half to yourself, "What are you still waiting for?" The bottle stays silent, which feels like an answer. Evening arrives. The sound of the market softens into background music. The city exhales after its celebration. You and Ajar sit by the open window, sipping tea cooled almost to forgetfulness. The light outside has turned coppery, then violet, then something between the two, the color of things that can't decide whether to stay or leave. You tell him every perfume is a conversation between time and air. He frowns. Then what's the bottle for? To pretend the conversation will last. He nods slowly, as if storing the line for later mischief. "Maybe we should stop pretending," he says. You smile. "Maybe, but people pay well for illusions that smell good." You close the shutters gently. The workshop darkens except for the lamp's soft circle of gold. You pick up the bottle again, uncork it once more, and watch how the scent moves. Invisible but assertive, like an idea entering a crowded mind. You write a few words in your notebook. Some memories insist on being smelled, not understood. Then you set the pen down and listen. The air hums faintly, the same way it does before a storm, except this time the weather's inside you. Historians still debate whether Mughal perfumers ever used scent for storytelling, if certain combinations were meant to evoke specific events or emotions. Some scholars argue that a handful of artisans treated their craft as literature, blending ingredients like metaphors, layering meaning through aroma. Others dismiss this as romantic nonsense. But as the bottle's fragrance fills your small room, you think, maybe the truth is that all perfume is autobiography. It just forgets your name. You leave the window open overnight. By dawn, the bottle is empty. You don't remember spilling it. The air smells faintly of rose, smoke, and something else. The kind of scent that pretends not to exist until you breathe a little deeper. Ajar enters, yawning. "What happened to the bottle?" You shrug. "It told its story and left." He laughs, assuming you're joking. You don't correct him. Some mysteries are better when no one insists on solving them. You walk to the window, watch the sun crawl up over the city, and whisper, "The air always remembers." The wind shifts, carrying the faintest trace of the vanished perfume back to you. Soft, tired, true. The heat has changed. It no longer arrives with warning. It just wakes before you do, presses down on the roof, and hums quietly while you pretend to sleep. By the time you rise, the air feels like it's been steeped in fatigue. Even the copper stills seem slower, their metal gone soft and dull. Ajar fans himself with a folded page from an old ledger, muttering complaints at both the weather and the gods of humidity. You're not much better. The mornings have begun to blur together, one soft repetition of light and breath. You start to think the city might be dissolving, melting a little each day into its own haze. It's the season of forgetting again, you tell Ajar, who stares blankly before replying, "Didn't we already make that perfume?" You laugh weakly. He's not wrong. To work in this heat is to negotiate with air itself. The oils resist, the water sulks, and every scent becomes slower, heavier, more stubborn. You stir a bowl of vetiver paste, the smell grassy and damp. The green scent rises like hope, pretending not to wilt. You remember your mother saying that vetiver kept madness away in summer. "It teaches the mind to lie down," she'd said. You think she meant that as comfort. You pour the mixture into a shallow tray and set it by the window to dry. The sunlight strikes it gently as if testing patience. You and Ajar wait in silence, the sound of a single bee exploring the room. Here's your historical fact. Mughal cities cooled their palaces and homes with mats woven from vetiver roots. Krustatis they were called. Water would be poured over them, and as it evaporated, it filled the air with an earthy sweetness that softened even the most unbearable afternoons. It wasn't just cooling, it was calming, a fragrance woven into architecture itself. You close your eyes, imagining the palace corridors filled with that scent, not of jewels or wealth, but of mercy. The emperor walking through air, perfumed by patience, unaware that comfort can smell so humble. Maybe luxury begins where gratitude forgets its own name. Ajar interrupts the thought. "Master," he says, "do you ever get tired of making things that disappear?" You glance at him. "Every day." He waits for more. And then I start again. He frowns. "Why?" You smile faintly. "Because disappearing beautifully is still an art. The air thickens by noon. You stop pretending to work. Instead, you take a jug of water and a handful of vetiver roots, drop them in, and leave the mixture by the door. Within an hour, the breeze that sneaks in smells faintly of green, the first relief you felt all day. Faizullah appears later, sweat beading on his forehead, his usual elegance defeated by climate. "You look like a melted thought," you tell him. He collapses onto a stool. "And you look like a man who's started speaking to himself in proverbs." "It's cheaper than conversation," you say. He waves a folded paper. "A poem," he says. "Don't ask if it's finished. It's too hot for closure." You pour him a cup of water, and together you sit in silence, the kind that doesn't ask for improvement. After a while, he speaks again, softly. "Do you think scent is the most honest form of memory?" You tilt your head. "No, it lies like everything else." "But kindly," he nods. "It's strange. Words can describe a thing, but scent becomes it." You smile. "That's why poets envy perfumers." An obscure cultural tidbit. There's a Persian proverb that made its way into Mughal poetry. Khushbu nafrat nahi rakhti. Fragrance holds no hatred. It was sometimes carved into small wooden boxes that stored precious oils. A reminder, perhaps, that beauty, when honest, cannot choose its audience. Even an enemy breathes. The afternoon stretches on, long and slow. You and Faizullah doze in your chairs. Ajar hums again, the same tune he always hums when he's thinking. Outside, the street vendors argue in a tone that sounds more affectionate than angry. The air keeps moving in lazy loops, carrying with it all the smells of the city. Smoke, sugar, sweat, faith. You wonder if air ever tires of being everyone's witness, As dusk settles, the first breeze of evening slides through the door. You inhale deeply. It smells different, cooler, saltier somehow. Rain coming. You smile. She's on her way, you whisper. Ajar looks up. Who? Relief. You step outside, the sky an uneven bruise of purple and orange. Clouds gather at the edges of everything. The first drops fall hesitant and wide, darkening the dust in perfect circles, and then release. The rain comes fast and certain, drenching roofs and thoughts alike. The scent rises. Earth breaking open, stones softening, every living thing sighing at once. You stand there, soaked, smiling. Faizullah joins you, arms outstretched, his laughter louder than the thunder. Ajar twirls like a fool. For once, no one cares about dignity. You think even philosophers deserve storms. By the time you return inside, dripping and breathless, the workshop smells like renewals, a blend of wet copper, ash, and joy. The air hums with its own echo. You sit by the window, water pooling around your feet, and whisper, "So this is what gratitude sounds like." You reach for your notebook, the pages wrinkled from humidity, and write slowly. The air forgives faster than we do. Historians still debate whether Mughal artisans considered rain a blessing or an interruption. Some chronicles describe workshops closed for weeks during monsoon, while others mention perfumers timing their creations to storms, believing certain scents revealed themselves only to thunder. You prefer the second version, or discard the one that treats weather as collaboration. The rain slows, then stops. Steam rises from the rooftops. The city glows, washed and humbled. You light a small lamp, its flame trembling but steady. The scent of vetiver lingers in the corners, soft and honest. Ajar, half asleep on the floor, murmurs, "Master, do you think the air ever gets tired of forgiving us?" You smile. "Every night," you say, "and every morning it forgives again." He nods once and drifts off. You stay awake longer, listening to the cooling world, the faint hiss of water finding its way into soil. You close your eyes, inhale deeply, and whisper to the darkness. Some things weigh nothing, and still they hold everything. The air, faithful as ever, carries your thought away, fragrant, invisible, true. The morning after the rain, the world looks rearranged. The city's edges have softened, its noise humbled. Every surface gleams, every smell has been reset. You stand in the doorway for a while, simply breathing. The air feels newly made, green, forgiving, too kind for ambition. You think of the emperor's marble gardens drying under the same sun and smile. Even power must smell of wet earth today. Inside, the workshop is quiet except for the sound of water dripping somewhere, a leftover rhythm from last night's storm. The stills shine brighter, their copper skin clean and curious again. You light the lamp, not for work, but for companionship. Ajar enters soon after, hair damp, eyes alert. "It smells like a promise," he says. You nod. "Let's find out which one." You decide to distill something simple. Rain itself, or the idea of it. Not the wetness or the noise, but the way it leaves everything more itself. You mix sandalwood oil with drops of river water and a single crushed leaf from the neem tree outside. The fragrance begins soft, hesitant, then steadies into calm. Clean, green, faintly bitter, faintly sweet. You hold the vial up to the light. "This," you say to Ajar, "is not a perfume. It's a pause." He frowns. "People won't buy a pause." You smile. "They already do. They just call it peace." You let the mixture rest and sit by the window, letting the sun dry your sleeves. The city hums below. Voices, wheels, prayer calls woven into rhythm. Somewhere, a vendor shouts about mangoes. Somewhere else, a woman sings while sweeping her doorstep. The music of continuity. Here's your historical fact. The Mughal fascination with perfume was never just sensory, it was cosmic. Court philosophers wrote of scent as the breath of creation, believing the first divine act, the moment the world began, must have carried fragrance. Some chroniclers described paradise as a garden that breathes truth. Others believed angels communicated by scent instead of words. You like that? The idea that the unseen can still leave traces. You glance at your shelves. Dozens of vials, all variations of invisible truth. You've spent a lifetime chasing what can't be held, and you're still not tired of it. You realize that's the closest thing you have to faith. Azhar interrupts your thought, waving a letter. From the palace, he says. You sigh, already predicting its contents. The Emperor, it seems, wishes for another scent. This time for dreams. He wants something to wear before sleeping, Azhar reads aloud. A fragrance that reminds him of simplicity. You chuckle softly. Simplicity costs extra. Still, you accept. Not because of duty, but because you like the absurdity of it. A man who owns half the known world asking to smell like rest. You start with sandalwood again, then add musk, a drop of rosewater, and a trace of lemon peel. The air grows warm, introspective. You imagine the Emperor lying awake beneath embroidered canopies, trying to remember what it felt like to sleep beside someone who loved him instead of obeyed him. You decide to name the perfume Carb, the dream. Azhar asks, do dreams have a scent? You think for a moment? Yes. They smell like truth wearing disguise. As you bottle the fragrance, you notice how calm the room feels. Even the fire has softened its crackle, as if listening. You write a small note to accompany the vial. For rest that asks no questions. Then you seal it, hand it to Azhar, and tell him to deliver it at dusk. When he's gone, you step outside. The sky is impossibly blue, the kind that looks fragile to touch. You walk toward the river, sandals damp from puddles. The banks glisten, and the air smells faintly of wet stone and jasmine. You sit at the edge, watching reflections shift with the ripples. A group of women nearby wash clothes, their laughter bright and unrestrained. The sound makes you smile. For all your philosophies, it's their laughter that teaches you how to exist lightly. An obscure cultural tidbit. In some Mughal households, women kept small pillows filled with perfumed herbs, lavender, rose petals, and crushed vetiver to scent their hair while they slept. They called them quabguls, dream flowers. Some even believed that pleasant scent invited good dreams, while bad ones came from stale air. You wonder if the Emperor knows that simplicity already exists in such small, tender habits. A breeze passes, carrying the faint scent of your newest creation from the workshop behind you. It mingles with river and sunlight until it becomes impossible to tell where the perfume ends and nature begins. You like that. Boundaries dissolving, intention becoming atmosphere. You think of Faizullah, of his poems about smoke and patience. And you think of Azhar learning to understand silence faster than you ever did. And you think of the Emperor, somewhere in his vast rooms, trying to sleep inside his own shadow. You think of yourself, here by the river, not sure whether you've built a life or a collection of questions. You whisper softly. All scent is conversation. All silence is reply. Historians still debate whether perfumers ever saw themselves as philosophers, or if the idea was a later romantic projection. The records left behind, A few notebooks, some recipes, fragments of poetry suggest at least one or two of them thought beyond commerce. But perhaps all artisans, when left alone with their craft long enough, begin to drift toward metaphysics. Repetition breeds reflection. The sun dips lower, staining the river orange. You stay until the first bats appear, tracing soft, erratic lines across the water. The city lights begin to flicker. Somewhere behind you a child runs, the sound of wooden sandals slapping stone like punctuation marks. You rise slowly, stretch, and head home. The air grows cooler, softer. When you reach the workshop, the scent of carb still lingers. Gentle, patient, unfinished. You smile, realizing that maybe it's the last thing you'll ever need to make. You blow out the lamp. The room breathes once, then rests. Before sleep, you write a single line in your notebook. If air is the first teacher, perhaps forgetting is its final lesson. Then, in the faint dark, you add another, and everything in between smells like becoming. You close the book, lean back against the wall, and let the quiet finish your thought. The world outside hums faintly, and in its rhythm you hear your own pulse. Slow, steady, fragrant with the calm of something understood. The next morning arrives not with sunlight, but with dust. A faint veil of it, thin as memory, hangs over the city. The streets look softened, outlines blurred. You breathe it in without meaning to. It smells faintly of wood, faintly of endings. Ajar coughs once, laughs, and says, "The world is drying out again." You nod. That's what worlds do. You haven't slept much. Maybe it's the air, maybe it's the feeling that something is winding down. You move through the workshop slowly, running your hand along the cool surface of the stills, tracing the grooves left by years of work. They hum quietly, as if remembering. You've come to realize these copper vessels know more of your thoughts than most people ever will. The shelves gleam with half-filled bottles, each holding a version of silence you once bottled. Saya, Kab, Zamin. Each name an echo of some earlier hour. You look at them now and wonder what happens to meaning when its maker grows tired. Maybe nothing. Maybe the air keeps learning even when you stop teaching. You find Ajar cleaning the stone floor, humming again. He hums more often now and softer, the sign of someone who's begun to understand patience. "Master," he says, "what will we make today?" You think for a long moment before answering. Nothing. Today we'll just watch the air remember. He tilts his head. Is that work? It's the last kind, you reply. You step outside. The sky is white, the kind of light that hides its own source. The river has shrunk to a thin shimmer in the distance. The world smells faintly of absence. Here's your historical fact. Toward the end of the Mughal Golden Age, perfumery declined quietly. Trade routes shifted, wars came, and priorities changed. The old attars were replaced by foreign distillations, lighter, sharper, less patient. The workshops closed, the copper stills were melted for coin, and the art became memory. But for centuries afterward, the people of Agra swore that after heavy rain, the air still smelled faintly of sandal and earth. You stand at the door of your own workshop and smile. Maybe that's how perfume survives, you whisper, by pretending to vanish. You go back inside and sit beside the lamp. Ajar joins you, curious but respectful of your silence. You pour the last of your oils into a shallow bowl. Vetiver, amber, and a single drop of rose. The scent rises like breath after confession. You hold it near the lamp until it begins to smoke. The air turns golden, soft. Ajar asks quietly, "What is this one called?" You answer without thinking. Akri hawa, the last air. You both watch it drift. The smoke moves differently today, slower, less eager to rise, curling instead in slow circles like a thought rehearsing how to leave. You close your eyes and let it pass around you. An obscure cultural tidbit. Some Mughal perfumers, when they felt their craft had reached its end, performed a quiet ritual called hawa dena, to give air. They would burn the remnants of their oils, releasing everything they had ever made into the atmosphere. The act wasn't about endings, but return, a belief that all scent belonged first to air and only borrowed the body for a while. You tell Ajar this story, and he listens carefully. So the air takes it back, he asks. Always, you say, but it leaves gratitude behind. The smoke fades and the room feels different, lighter, emptied, but alive. You realize this is what freedom smells like, nothing to prove, nothing to keep. You sit for a long while, just breathing. Faizullah visits one last time, carrying no scrolls, no new poems. You're hard to find these days, he says, smiling faintly. I stopped looking for anything that wants to be found, you reply. He nods, sits beside you, and for the first time, you talk without purpose. He tells you the emperor has grown frail, that courtiers whisper about succession. You listen, unmoved. Empires, perfumes, both fade gracefully when given time. As evening falls, you light the lamp one last time. The glow spreads gently across the room, softening every edge. Ajar sits nearby, drowsy but attentive. You pour 2 cups of tea, hand him one, and raise yours slightly. To air, you say. He grins. To air. The wind outside stirs, carrying faint hints of sandal, dust, and smoke. A blend that could be history itself. The scent seeps through the window, filling the small room with memory too subtle to name. Historians still debate who the final master perfumers of the Mughal courts truly were. Some say they fled to smaller towns, some joined foreign traders, and some simply stopped when the silence grew loud enough. But local folklore insists that one man, unnamed, released his entire life's work into the wind one evening, and that every spring thereafter, when the first rain touched the soil, the earth exhaled his signature. You sit by the window, smiling at the thought. Maybe that legend belongs to you. Maybe it doesn't matter. You whisper softly, all work ends in air. Ajar looks at you, unsure if you're talking to him or to the room. You smile and add, when the air remembers, that's enough. The lamp burns lower, the flames small and deliberate. Outside, the first star appears, faint as a kept promise. You close your eyes, listening to the city settling into its night rhythm. Everything smells gentle. The tea, the rain-soaked wood, even the tired dust. You think, perhaps this is how creation ends, not with noise, but with fragrance learning to rest. The air drifts slower now, every sound turns soft at the edges, the stills gleam faintly in the dark, reflecting a single trembling flame. You lean back in your chair, eyes half closed, breathing in what remains. There's sandal in the air, faint rose, and something quieter still, the scent of completion. The city outside hums like a tired lullaby. A bullock cart passes, wheels creaking against the stone. Somewhere, a child laughs once, then falls silent. The river moves, unseen but certain. Even the dust has stopped pretending to rise. You think about how every fragrance you ever made was really an attempt to name stillness. To bottle a breath, to keep what can't be kept. But maybe this quiet, this ease, was the truest perfume all along. Ajar has fallen asleep on the floor, hand still curled near his brush. The lamplight catches his hair, turns it gold for a moment before dimming. You smile. He'll go on. He'll find his own silences to perfume. You reach for your notebook one last time, trace the edge of the cover, then close it gently. The page inside smells faintly of ink and sandal. You whisper, and the air will finish the sentence. Outside, the wind moves. Slow, thoughtful, infinite. If you're still awake, breathe with it. In through the nose, out through the thought. Let the quiet rise and fall like incense smoke. Let your body settle into the rhythm of soft remembering. You've walked through centuries tonight, and now the road has turned to sky. Rest here. The air will keep the story for you. If you enjoyed this slow drift through history, subscribe, leave a quiet comment with your city and local time, and tell the air good night.